I established the Solace Foundation just over 2 years ago. So since February 2016, I work in partnership with the Orange County Needle Exchange. I've managed to hand out and train 5,000 naloxone kits, and we are now up to 1,224 reversals in 20 months. That's just at on the Saturday. I don't count all the reversals in treatment centres. The reason I can do what I do is Assembly Bill 635, the Overdose Treatment Act. And this was introduced into many states, specifically in California. AB 65 is the Overdose Treatment Act, and it allows me, the Solace Foundation of Orange County, to train and distribute naloxone. And I work under a standing order model with Dr. David Dahimi, and he takes full responsibility for clinical oversight. Individuals are permitted to carry naloxone and use it without fear of criminal or civil prosecution for practicing medicine without a license. You are completely covered like the CPR law. If you think somebody is overdosing and you administer naloxone, you are entirely covered. Nobody has ever been sued for administering naloxone. In a treatment environment, the only thing you have to be mindful of is expiration dates. This medication should be accessible. It should not be locked away. The only medication in a treatment center that should be out there for anybody to grab in an emergency. Only thing that people will check for, like JACO, is the date, the expiration date. They'll pick it up, they'll look, and it'll say clearly. So you just have to make sure it's well within its expiration date. Assembly Bill 1535 was passed in 2014, September, and this was to make naloxone easy to get your hands on naloxone if you don't have a prescription. So basically, you can go to any pharmacy. In time, this will happen. It's not every pharmacy yet, but it will happen. You can go into a pharmacy and get naloxone without a prescription. And if you have your insurance, it can go through insurance. If you don't have insurance, you can pay for it. Naloxone, Narcan, it's the same drug. Narcan is the trade name. It's exactly the same drug. It's an opioid antagonist which reverses an opioid overdose. It only works for opioids. It can be administered various ways, and I'm going to show you all three that I distribute. It works for 30 to 90 minutes, so it's a temporary reversal. It can put somebody into withdrawals if they're opioid dependent, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through it. And it has no effect if an opioid is not present. So if you were to give it to somebody and they had no opioids in their system, it would do nothing. It's a very safe medication. So the rule of thumb is if you find somebody down, you're not sure what they've taken, you're going to give them naloxone anyway. It's not going to hurt them. You're assuming that there are opioids in the mix. Obviously, it can't get you high. It can't cause an overdose. It's very important. You can't develop a tolerance to it. Unlike opioids that we do develop tolerance to, you do not develop a tolerance to naloxone. It works every time. And how it works is we have an endogenous opioid system. We produce our own opioids. When we take an external opioid, it binds to the same receptors. It goes in, binds to these receptors, and if we have too many opioids and too many receptors, it literally shuts down the breathing part of the brain. We stop breathing. And if you give somebody naloxone in time, it goes in, it knocks the opioids off the receptors, and then it binds to those receptors for 30 to 90 minutes. And this is where the withdrawal is going to come in. If you knock those opioids off the receptors, it can make people feel very uncomfortable for that period of time. I stress it's temporary. So you give them Narcan, it goes in, it sits on those receptors, and as long as the Narcan's on those receptors, they will feel those withdrawals. The Narcan's going to leave those receptors 30 to 90 minutes later. The opioids will reattach, and they'll feel the effects of the opioid again. But in that 30 to 90 minutes, it's made the opioid less potent. In most cases, the majority of cases, they will be fine. Once the opioids reattach, they won't overdose again. What are opioids? Opioids are on the left: heroin, morphine, methadone, oxycontin, hydrocodone, fentanyl. Most people know what opioids are. Naloxone works for all opioids. There's some hysteria in the papers about fentanyl being resistant to Narcan. It's not resistant to Narcan. Fentanyl is very fast acting. It goes to those receptors so quickly, which just stresses even more why it's important that we all have naloxone readily available, because you have less time to reverse an overdose if you have fentanyl going straight to those receptors. Naloxone only works on opioids. So, we know that if we give somebody naloxone and we're not sure what they've taken, it will at least take the opioids off the receptors, hopefully get them breathing again, but it will have no effect on any of the other substances in their body. We had a case just a few weeks ago where we had 2 reversals in Costa Mesa. Both clients reported using cocaine. Now, cocaine does not contain opioids. This particular batch of cocaine clearly did. I'm guessing it was fentanyl laced. It's just, and again, if somebody overdoses, you don't know what they've taken, you're going to give them naloxone anyway, because it may well be, even if you don't expect it, it may well be that they have opioids in their system, in the mix. What puts people at risk of overdosing? Mixing drugs. Methamphetamine and heroin together is more likely to cause a person to overdose. Some people are under the illusion it balances out. It does not. It makes them more likely to overdose. Variation in strength and purity. So we have batches of stronger heroin going around, and that's when we see a rash of overdoses. I mean, if we average it out, we're getting 25 reversals every single week. But the truth is, some weeks it's much, much worse, and it's when a stronger batch of heroin goes around. Two things are happening in Orange County. Dealers are not cutting their heroin so much, making it stronger and more attractive to their customers. But then we also have fentanyl. Some truly do have fentanyl in it. The needle exchanges are going to be handing out fentanyl test strips. I'm more in favor of telling everybody to treat whatever substance they're using as if it has fentanyl in it. You should be cautious. We should treat everything like it could potentially have fentanyl in. So variation of strength and purity. Switching mode of admin, obviously, it's better. It is safer to smoke than inject. But we have many people who die from smoking heroin. The young man at that sober living almost died from smoking it. Tolerance changes. Most of the people that I know lost their kids straight out of hospital, out of jail, out of treatment. Any period of not using opioids longer than 3 to 5 days puts them at risk of an overdose because their tolerance changes and it takes a while to build up tolerance. Obviously, new experimenting drug users are more likely to overdose. Using alone in sober living treatment centres, usually the clients are found in the bathroom. They've been in there too long, taps are running. So I think it's very important to be aware that if a client is in the bathroom too long, somebody should be knocking on the door and checking on them. And if their physical health is compromised, we've talked a bit about abscesses. You would not believe how many people I work with on a Saturday who have had MRSA, who have had sepsis, who have had terrible abscesses. Once they've had it, they're more likely to have it again. So you definitely will encounter clients who have had history of such infections. How do you recognize an overdose? Probably many of you have witnessed an overdose. The thing about an overdose is you probably all know what it looks like to nod out. Have you all witnessed somebody nodding out? Mm-hmm. It's literally when they just nod like this, and it's like they're sleeping and nodding. When somebody's nodding out, you can rouse them. You can shout at them. You can shake them. They will respond. It's that time when it goes beyond the nodding out, they become unresponsive. What people don't realize, in most cases, an overdose happens over a period of time. And I'm talking specifically about heroin before fentanyl came into the picture. Most overdoses happen over a period of 1 to 3 hours. I actually got to save a young man's life in November. He was found on a bench close to where I work on a Saturday. And he was with some medical students who work with me at the needle exchange, and they came and got me and said, "Amy, he's still breathing, but we're worried about him. Something's just not right." And I got to the bench, and he was sitting upright. He was drooling, so obviously he wasn't maintaining his airways. There was drool coming out of his mouth. So immediately I knew we were in trouble. And I shouted his name, and he didn't respond. I rubbed his sternum, nothing. And I knew instinctively that he was dying. Even though he was breathing, he was dying. The breath would have been the next thing to stop, and then his heart would have stopped. So I was able to get to him before breathing stopped, and it took 2 doses of Narcan to actually get him responsive. And there's various reports on what it looks like when you revive somebody. I've taken hundreds of reports. In this case, this young man literally just woke up on the second shot. First shot, nothing. There was no response. Second shot, he just woke up and opened his eyes and started talking to me. He was kind of shocked to see me there looking at him. He was somewhat defensive. "I didn't use since I last saw you." And I just explained to him, no, you used 2 hours ago, and you combined benzos with heroin, which I tell you not to do. and you sat down and you were dying. And this is, you know, it's just looking for that change in responsiveness. Are they nodding out? Are they losing? Are they becoming unresponsive? If you give naloxone too early, better that than too late. You know, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to throw them into withdrawals. So we look, you know, we know it's a process of time. They over time they will stop responding and they will stop breathing, and then their heart will stop. With fentanyl, it's slightly different in that it's just so fast, it goes straight to the receptors. So we are hearing more stories of people turning blue very, very quickly. So, you know, I'm contradicting myself here. If fentanyl's involved, you don't have the 1 to 3 hours. You have moments, and that's why we need naloxone everywhere. Did I look at his eyes? No. I mean, you could go through this list, you know, from muscles becoming relaxed to that deep snoring, which I've heard so many times, and it's very, very scary. Really high speech can be slurred, but an overdose, you know, they're not talking. Their colour is changing. They're becoming pale and clammy looking, and they just don't respond, and finally they stop breathing. So it's important to reckon, you know, it's basically it's responsiveness. Are they responsive? And remember that sternum rub. I mean, any pain, but that's what we recommend, the sternum rub. You know, I've encountered people, especially in Costa Mesa, as I drive to my trainings, I've encountered people lying on the grass, you know, on the grass, and we all assume that, oh, they're just sleeping. Don't ever assume that. You know, if you see this, please pull over. I'm not asking you to get down and rub their sternum straight off, but kick the soles of their feet. See if they are responsive. If they're responsive, you can back off really quickly if you're just kicking the soles of their feet. You know, let's not assume anybody's just sleeping, because we lose too many people this way. The first thing you're going to do is call 911 or shout for somebody to call 911. In a facility, you want paramedics there as soon as possible. You don't know what has happened to this client. You're assuming it's got an opioid in the mix of this, whatever it might be, an overdose. You're going to give naloxone because you have no other antidote, but you want somebody to call 911, and ideally shout for somebody if you have to do it yourself. When I work at the Civic Centre, I explain that we have the 911 Good Samaritan law now, and it offers limited protection. You know, if you call, the person who makes the call, the person who is overdosing should be protected. Sadly, it's not always the case. You know, unfortunately, if there are warrants out for individuals, they can absolutely exercise that warrant. So it's a little ambiguous. You found somebody down, you've shouted for somebody to call 911. Whether you use naloxone first or rescue breathing depends on the proximity of the naloxone. If you have naloxone right there, grab the naloxone. If not, give them a couple of rescue breaths. They're dying because they're not getting oxygen. So a couple of rescue breaths if you have to run and get the naloxone, or shout for somebody to get naloxone. Using naloxone. So there are various ways of administering naloxone. We're going to be leaving the nasal Narcan, which is this one at first. This is what's going to be in the facility, but I'm going to show you all the different types that I give out. This is the nasal Narcan. It comes, every Narcan kit has to have 2 doses. As I explained to you, the young man that I saved, it took 2 doses. If you use one, you must replace another one. There must always be 2 available. And it comes in a pouch like this. This is what all law enforcement are going to be carrying. You do not take it out of the pouch until it's ready to use. So you take it out of the pouch. It's very, very simple. The reason you don't take it out of the pouch is it's very sensitive. You don't want to press this until it's actually in somebody's nose. And you're going to get their head back. Ideally, put them on their back. But if you can't, put their head back. Put the Narcan in either nostril. It doesn't matter which one. Your nose up to as far as it can go, and then you just press. And I'll show you. Just this fine mist comes out. And one of the questions that is often asked is, if they're not breathing, how can it work? Well, it's absorbed into the mucous membrane, so it works if they're not breathing. It's just absorbed into the system. So that's how you administer the nasal Narcan. It couldn't be easier. The only mistake I've ever seen with this nasal Narcan is somebody's tried to prime it. This is not like a normal nasal spray. You don't prime it. And some people think, how could this simple device, where's the Narcan? Well, it's in there. It's very, very simple. And then the other thing I'm going to explain to you is the auto-injector. A lot of facilities have this auto-injector, and sometimes we hand this out to parents at the needle exchange when I do the Narcan training. And this one talks to you. It's a wonderful device.
This trainer contains no needle or drug.
This is a trainer. These do contain both those things.
If you are ready
goes through 6 layers of clothing. This is the
trainer
trainer. Every kit comes with a trainer and 2 doses of naloxone. The real thing talks to you too. And this is what I used to save that young man's life. I was at a presentation at Mission Hospital yesterday, and one of the nurses tried to use this one as a trainer by mistake, and I stopped it just in case. And I also heard of a treatment facility that had the trainer in the kits, you know, in the emergency kit. The trainer is just to train. This is the real deal, you know, the actual medication. So I wouldn't put them together in an emergency kit. I would separate them for that reason. You know, I've been doing this for 2 years without any funding. I go around treatment facilities and they give donations, which is how I've kept it running out of absolutely nothing. So I had to go for the cheapest possible naloxone available, and it's these little vials. I always have to give out 2 under Dr. Tahimi's standing order. And these come with syringes. They're muscle syringes. And it's exactly the same. They're all equally good. You know, they all work exactly the same way. Some treatment centers, you know, in other states have the needles. I prefer not to have needles in treatment facilities, but I do hand this out at the Civic Center. As I say, the healthcare agency are going to be providing me with some nasal Narcan. Problem we have with this kit is that we have law enforcement confiscating needles, sometimes charging clients with paraphernalia, and they're leaving them with this. How horrible is that? You know, so an overdose happens and they don't have them. There's no way of using this, right? You need the needles to use the Narcan. So just going back, you find somebody unresponsive, you shout it, call 911. If you can't get straight to the Narcan, you give them some rescue breathing, and you administer your first shot of Narcan, whether it be a nasal spray or the injectable type of Narcan. And then you make sure that their airways are clear, and maybe they'll need some more rescue breathing. You will have paramedics on the phone. You'll have the 911 operator on the phone. They will instruct you on what to do, whether it's rescue breathing or chest compressions. If they're not breathing in 2 to 3 minutes, you're going to give them the second dose, okay? Whatever, whether it's another nasal spray. If it's the nasal spray, do it in the other nostril. If it's the auto-injector, go for the other thigh. Not essential with the auto-injector, but that's what I did. I gave him a shot in one thigh and then a shot in the other thigh. I don't know whether that's kinder or not. It really doesn't, you know, it just seemed logical to me at the time. And then, you know, if the second shot doesn't work, you go for a third shot. You can't overdose on naloxone. We have to understand that if we don't get to an individual soon enough, we can't save everybody. You know, we have that window of opportunity, and at some point you have to question, and whoever's at the operator on the line will tell you. But we have had, just a few weeks ago, I had somebody who has saved a number of lives. He saved a young girl in San Clemente. She'd been in jail, came out of jail, it took 6 shots to get her back, 6 shots before paramedics got there. And she survived, and he knew what he was doing. He wasn't just going blindly giving her all these shots. He knew enough to wait 2 minutes, another shot, 2 minutes, rescue breathing. And we're seeing more of this, you know, we're seeing stronger stuff out there. So just be aware you cannot overdose on naloxone. The more you give, the worse the withdrawals, but we're talking life and death. Recovery position, really important. You're given a dose of naloxone. They're waking up, they're talking to you, they're feeling groggy, they're perhaps feeling nauseous. You're going to put them on their side and you're going to put their knee up. We don't want them rolling onto their back or on their stomach, because a lot of people end up in the emergency room or in hospital because they aspirate, they throw up and it goes into their lungs. So on their side, knee up, and their head should be resting on something to keep, you know, if they were to throw up, it would go away from their body. So if it's a pillow or if it's their own hand, their chin resting on their hand. It should be kept between 59 and 86 degrees, room temperature. It never goes into a refrigerator. We don't want it to get overly hot. It won't destroy it immediately, but over a period of time it'll be less potent. So we don't want people jumping out of the car and leaving the Narcan naloxone in the car. And you know, when I'm training at the Civic Center, I tell people in active drug use, you can't save yourself. You have to tell your friends you carry it. Aftercare, stay with the person. If they don't respond after 2 to 3 minutes, you may need to give them a second dose. In the meantime, continue rescue breathing or chest compressions as instructed by the person on the telephone, the 911 operator. When they wake up, explain to them what has happened and tell them that you gave them naloxone. The young man I saved had no idea. You know, he didn't know he was dying, and he left quite quickly afterwards because he had a warrant out, and it took a long time for law enforcement to arrive. And so, you know, he came to see me the next week and he said, "You saved my life. You know, I didn't realize, my friends told me that I was dying and you saved it." And, you know, he came back a few weeks ago with a rose from his mother to thank me, you know, and it's quite a profound moment when a mother who's lost her son gets a chance to save another mother's son. So, you know, I get to experience some beautiful things. One of the side effects of naloxone is withdrawal symptoms, temporary withdrawal symptoms. They vary hugely between people. You know, not everybody goes into withdrawals. Some do, some don't. These symptoms will wear off. Discourage the person from taking more drugs. They might want to inject again. We've discussed that, you know, basically it would be pointless because they have Narcan sitting on their receptors. The effects of the opiates are usually longer than the effects of the naloxone. This means that when the naloxone wears off, 30 to 90 minutes later, the opiates reattach. So temporary withdrawals. And this is just an acronym, SCARE ME. Stimulation. Are they responsive? Call an ambulance. Call 911. If you have somebody else there, get them to do it while you get the naloxone or whatever. Check the airways. Give some rescue breathing if you can't get straight to the naloxone. So you're evaluating, can I get to the naloxone quick enough? I think it's really important to mention that you can keep somebody alive just by breathing for them. You know, if you can't get your hands on naloxone, we breathe and we keep them alive till paramedics get there. The naloxone certainly makes it a heck of a lot easier. Give them the shot of naloxone or the spray of naloxone and then evaluate again. Has it been 2 to 3 minutes? It's very difficult in this very stressful situation. It's very traumatizing to have any concept of time. But you know that you can't overdose on naloxone. So when you think it's been 2 to 3 minutes, then you give them the second dose. And that is it. That is the training. It's very, very simple to save a life.